Hello and welcome back. One of the awesome things about living in the middle of nowhere and having a little bit of land, overgrown as it is you can find a fair amount of wild edibles. And if you're creative, you can you can build things around them. We walked through this previously. I showed you that we had some wild cucumbers growing in the bush. We even made a wild plum. Why are you bleeping me? I said, whatever. We even made a wild plum barbecue sauce in our grilled chicken episode. Today, we're going to switch things up a little bit. I have more wild plums, and it was a bountiful harvest this year. Wild plums are kind of weird, to be honest. Some years I get nothing, some 2 or 3 on a tree. Some years the trees are just absolutely full. You have to be very quick to pounce on them, though, because wildlife will eat them up before you can harvest them all. So with our wild plums today, we're going to do a hot sauce. Now, my favorite application for this hot sauce is on a wing, but it's awesome to just dip chips in as well. As far as the wild cucumbers go, we're going to make some refrigerator pickles. They're pretty easy, pretty cheap to throw together. Obviously cheaper because we're using our own cucumbers, but the other ingredients are not real expensive either. Really, the theme is making the most with what you've got. We're big believers in this, whether it's taking dirt cheap cuts of meat and trying to make something good out of them. That used to be an easier thing before everybody else caught on to that, and brisket became $70 each. Or just building with what you have. I mean, I've put together things out of logs I've cut out here over the years, used them as fence posts, things like that, right? It's about not only saving money, but being efficient. Now, there is a time cost with efficiency, so you have to balance that a little bit. This is normally where I'd say, let's get a fire started, but the only fire today is on my cooking stove. But that aside, let's dig in. All right, boring as it may be, our first stop is the sink. You always want to give these things a good wash off. Make sure that you don't have any that are bug-eaten, rotten, any of those kinds of things. That's especially important with these wild cucumbers because we don't want them to be overripe. In the water, you'll notice that any of your debris, things like twigs or whatever, will float to the top, and it makes it pretty easy to skim them off. And I'm just going to give these things a further rinse. Can't be too careful here. And onto the cutting board. I know what you're probably thinking. These things are tiny. Why are we cutting them up? Well, we're making refrigerator pickles. And in a refrigerator pickle, we don't get the same level of the brine soaking in as we would if we were boiling the fruits themselves. And so I'm just cutting the very ends of these things off so that the brine soaks in and these things take on the flavor that we want them to. Realistically, if they're small enough, I'll cut off just one end. That's enough to allow the brine in. And once we're finished chopping them all, we're going to add about a tablespoon of salt to these and throw them in the fridge. Now, this is to get the cure, if you will, started, draw some moisture out so that they'll take on the brine a little bit better. And then we'll just pop on the lid and give these things a shake to coat. and then they'll go in the fridge for about an hour, at least an hour. You know, I almost forgot. We've got to add some onion to this as well, because we want to draw the moisture out of the onion, because it's just as big a star of the show as the cucumbers are. Okay, so 1 hour in the fridge. To get our brine started, we've got about 2 tablespoons of a good apple cider vinegar. And to that, we're going to add about a half cup of white vinegar. We're on medium heat right now. And next up is about a 1/4 cup of dark brown sugar. To that, we're going to add a teaspoon of mustard seeds, and then about a half teaspoon of red pepper flakes. This is to taste. A half teaspoon of celery seeds, and then about a 1/4 teaspoon of ground turmeric. This is the stuff that'll give mustard its color. Going to give this a stir, and then we're going to raise the heat a little bit. We want this to come not really to a rolling boil, and we definitely don't want to reduce it, but we do want all of the ingredients to dissolve. Well, most of them. Good luck trying to dissolve the mustard seeds. And that's really all there is to this brine. It's very, very simple. It's just a matter of getting all of the sugars and various spices dissolved into the mixture so that it will coat our cucumbers but not leave them with clumps of spice on them. And we'll let that cool down for just a little bit before we pour it over our cucumbers. Got my cucumbers and onions in 2 jelly jars, and we're just going to go ahead and pour this brine over them, about a 50-50 split between the 2 jars. You can see it's a very dark colored brine. It's a bread and butter type pickle, so it's going to be sweet. Now we're just going to seal these up tightly. Make sure that lid is on solid, and then we are going to store these in a fridge for really a minimum of 3 days, and it's better at a week. These wild plums are just absolutely gorgeous, and these are nice and bright red. Same as with the cucumbers, first thing we want to do is give these a wash. Now, we got quite a bit more in this bowl than we had of the cucumbers. And we're doing a few things here. First, we're going to obviously clean off any dirt or dust or bug parts or anything like that that's on these plums. But we're also going to have to go through these and make sure we pull out any plums that look rotten or chewed up, those sorts of things. To do that, I'm actually going to sort through these one by one and throw them into my stock pot here. It's kind of an arduous process, admittedly, but I just really don't want to take any chances. All right, and here are our rejects. Chewed up, rotted, whatever. The rest of the pot is good to go. And now we're going to fill this up with water until it's just covering our plums. That looks good, and now we'll just move it over to our stove. We're going to start these things off at a high level of heat. We want a boil out of this because we want all of these plums to break up and release their juices into the water. Not gonna lie, this is gonna take a while. And after about 30 or so minutes here, you're gonna start to notice the water's gonna take on some color as these are starting to open up. You'll also notice that they start to float to the top as they burst open. So it's kind of a built-in time check for you. When all of them are floating, for the most part, they're all going to be open. Now, just like we did in the barbecue episode, we're going to give these things a little bit of a helping hand. You can see they're opening up here, but we're going to take our spatula and just kind of press these against the side so that they all split wide open and release their juice. After a while, once they're all open like this, I like to switch to this little slotted strainer or spoon and just give them a good mash to get the last of it. And when it's all done cooking, I will take a bowl and a strainer, and we're going to strain this mixture out. We only want the juice, and as I'd mentioned previously, there's going to be some pulp in there, and that's fine. I'm actually going to let this sit here for a little while because it's quite hot, and we're going to want to press all of this out with some paper towels, and then wring it out, but too hot right now. And here we see all of our delicious juice. Let that drain out for a bit, and then we're going to move this strainer over to a bowl that I've got prepared over here because, as I mentioned, we want to get the last of the juice out of these husks. And we're going to do that by just gently pressing down on this and getting all that trapped juice out. This is why you really want to let this cool for a little bit, because these would be just scorching hot. And you'll see here just how much juice we were able to get out of those husks. So definitely do not want to waste that. Now we are definitely not done with this. There's a lot of water left in it. So we're going to have to put it back on the stove and reduce it to the consistency that we want. Plus we've got some spices and things to add. So back into our pot at medium-high heat, and we're going to boil this down till it's about a 1/2 reduction. This is going to take quite a while. Every so often you're going to want to kind of scrape the top off. You're going to get this thick, I don't know, kind of almost scum. It's from the proteins and things that were in here, the leftover pulp, that sort of thing. After another, 20-30 minutes or so, you can see it's reduced by half. You see that ring at the top where it started. So now we're ready to add our other ingredients to this and turn it into a hot sauce.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and transfer this to a smaller saucepan, just easy to work in, but if you'd rather just use the original one, that's fine. We're using 2 cups of our reduced plum juice. There was plenty more available that I'll use for something else, but 2 cups is what we need for this. To that, we'll add about a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. Now I always like to give my liquid ingredients just a quick stir. Next up, we're going to add about a half cup of brown sugar. This is dark brown sugar. I know it's a hot sauce, but you want it to kind of be sweet too. It's such a good blend of flavors. And we'll just give that a stir in. And notice how the color has changed. It's kind of this deep hue now, just gorgeous. Then we're going to go in with a half teaspoon of ground allspice. Don't need to be fresh here, ground's fine. And then a half teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Also, the regular stuff in a can is fine, doesn't need to be fresh here. We go in with about a teaspoon of salt. A half teaspoon of onion powder, also known as granulated onion. And then a teaspoon of granulated garlic, also known as garlic powder. I like to go ahead and give it a taste here just to make sure that all my spices and sweetness and all that stuff are correct before I add the heat. And speaking of heat, we're starting off with a tablespoon of red pepper flakes. This is to taste. The pepper flakes, given the other stuff I'm adding here, are kind of more for texture than anything else, but it will definitely bring some heat. Now, I mean, you really could, if you wanted to, leave it right here. I mean, it's got a little bit of heat, but this is nowhere near enough for me. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons of Reaper dust. Now, this is ground up, dried Carolina Reaper peppers. These are very, very hot. I would caution you when you add it in to mix it slowly. You don't want to kick any of this dust up into the air. And you can see that it's even changing the color of the sauce a little bit here as it mixes in. And after that's all dissolved and incorporated, we're going to go ahead and give this a little bit of a taste test here. Whew, yeah, that's a suitable level of spiciness. And keep in mind, too, this will get a little hotter as it sits, but I love it right now. We're going to let this cool and then pour into a jelly jar, and we'll keep it in the fridge for about a day. This will keep a long time because of the amount of vinegar, but I just want all the flavors to really come together.
There are a couple of caveats that we have to talk about with wild edibles, right? Number one, know what you're picking. You can go to a county extension. You can find somebody who's knowledgeable about the wild edibles in your area. You can look it up online, but be very, very sure of what it is you're looking up. Don't just go, well, that kind of looks like that, because it could be the difference between a delicious dish and certain death. In our case, the plums were pretty obvious. The first year I saw them, I let them get red, and I picked one off the tree and popped it open, and sure enough, it smelled like a plum. It's a very distinctive smell. Tasted it, it was tart, but not bitter. Wild edible should not be bitter. If you're gonna just take a little taste and you notice an instant bitter flavor, discard it. it's probably toxic. That's not always the case, but it's a good rule of thumb. As far as the cucumbers go, honestly, I think those started popping up 2 or 3 years ago. I hadn't seen them at all. It's generally called like creeping cucumber. They're not very big, right? But the plant, the leaf, does look like a cucumber plant. The berry-sized cucumber that grows on it comes off on its own little vine. The whole plant vines just like cucumber or squash plants do. So I was relatively certain of what it was, but I did kind of the same sort of thing. Now, the first year, I did it when I thought they were ripe. They were very dark. When I opened them that year, they didn't have a smell that was particularly appetizing, so I didn't even try to taste them. The following year, when I found them and they were still a bright green color, I popped it open, smelled it. It smelled like a cucumber. Tasted it. It tasted like a cucumber. Once I'd had some of these facts that I could put together, then I went online and looked it up. Come to find out that you can eat them just fine, or most sources say you can eat them just fine, when they are green. When they are black, how do I put this delicately? They become the mother of all laxatives. So if you're extraordinarily backed up, I guess maybe take a shot at it, but I wouldn't advise it. Another caveat to wild edibles, specifically hunting wild edibles, be mindful of your surroundings, right? Of course, there's the standard risk of poison oak, poison ivy, poison sumac, those sorts of things that can cause one heck of an itch if you come in contact with them. But there's also the wildlife. You could come across a rattlesnake. I've done it. You could come across one of these little girls. Yes, she's quite large. As long as you can see a black widow or really any spider, you're generally fine. Just don't disturb it. Yes, black widows are venomous, but it takes a lot to get them riled. Essentially destroying their web is one way to do that. So if you see that web, steer clear. Rattlesnakes, or really any venomous snake, or I suppose any snake at all, it's a little different. You might not always see them before they see you. With any of them, just give them their distance. I have had an aggressive one before. Had one that just wouldn't leave me alone, even as I backed up and tried to move off, and well, he met with a bitter end. For the most part, you're not going to have to worry about that. If the grass is buzzing or rattling, stay away from that grass. Important safety tip. Okay, so you saw what they looked like. The color of the brine for the pickles is, it's kind of dark. It's a bread and butter brine. Very sweet, still got some sour to it. The onions were excellent. And the cucumbers, even after, now a week in the fridge, yes, things went a little long, were nice and crunchy. I mean, they were just perfect. The hot sauce, one little word of advice if you're going to make something like that, and you can use store-bought plums, by the way. You can absolutely make that sauce with store-bought plums. You're just going to have to adjust your measurements a little bit. But when you make a sauce with those plums, the way I made it, you might have to give it a stir before you use it. And that's because there's no chemical stabilizers or anything like that in that sauce. You buy a sauce in the store, it's got that stuff in it, unless it's a really, really good hot sauce. After you give it a stir though, I mean, you saw it's a gorgeous color. I just ate it on some chips. I'm gonna be honest, I ate it about 15 minutes ago. My mouth still got some tingles, especially my lips. I noticed different sauces do different things, but this one hits me in the lips. Now, I can tolerate very, very spicy food. Not everybody can. This had Reaper dust in it, which is essentially just dried and then ground up Carolina Reaper peppers that were homegrown. And I wouldn't say they were the hottest I ever had, because peppers can vary. I mean, even within the same, exact type of pepper can be, more or less spicy. But they're still at the high end of the scale. These are a lot hotter than habaneros. Certainly a much hotter pepper than a jalapeno. So either of those two peppers would also be good in this sauce. Pick your desired level of heat and go to town. So I know there was no barbecue in this episode. I promise we're not frauds. There will be more barbecue, but it was outdoor focused, right? And I love to cook outside. And in this case, I love to use what I found outside in the kitchen. I hope you found this useful. Even if you just go to the grocery store and pick up the regular cucumbers, the regular plums, get them in season. Don't just buy them at any time of the year. They're in season, starting maybe late August through sometimes early October. But in either case, get those ingredients at the store if you don't have them, if you don't have the wild versions, and make these up. Tell me what you think. We'd love to hear some feedback. We'd also love to hear if you have any experiences with wild edibles, mushrooms, any other wild growing fruit, and what you've done with it. I absolutely love those kinds of stories, and I love to, incorporate those into my repertoire, as it were. Thanks for sticking around. If you like what you saw, please give us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Cold War Barbecue.